Do you know that feeling when someone blocks your escape route in a fire? That's exactly how I felt when I discovered Karen from the HOA secretly plugging her Tesla charger into my outdoor outlet, causing my electric bill to skyrocket by $300 monthly. But don't click away just yet, because how my smart power protection system transformed her $90,000 car into a useless battery brick is more satisfying than the game of... Drop a comment below about where you're watching this from. I bet many of you are supposed to be working right now. No worries, your secret's safe with me. And trust me, this story is worth your time. Before I dive into this electrical nightmare, let me give you some context. They say good fences make good neighbors, but sometimes even the best fences can't protect you from entitled people who think rules apply to everyone except them. Growing up in a blue-collar neighborhood in the Midwest taught me to respect other people's property, a concept apparently foreign to certain Tesla-driving suburbanites with designer sunglasses and a pathological aversion to paying their own bills. What follows is not just a tale of power theft, but a carefully engineered lesson in consequences that I'm still rather proud of to this day. As my grandfather used to say, the best teacher for a thief isn't the police, it's the unexpected trap. When Deborah Harrington moved into the house next door with her gleaming white Tesla Model X, I had no idea she'd become the bane of my existence. I'm Ethan Bailey, a 35-year-old electrical engineer working remotely for a tech company in Seattle. My background includes 6 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, where I specialized in power grid systems and security infrastructure, before transitioning to civilian life. The military taught me discipline, precision, and problem-solving skills that would prove surprisingly useful in suburban warfare. I've lived in Pinewood Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood with an active homeowners association, for about 3 years now. I'd bought the place after my divorce. Nothing dramatic, just two people realizing they wanted different things. And I had been enjoying the peaceful routine of my new bachelor life. It's a nice enough place with manicured lawns, community barbecues in the summer, and neighbors who generally mind their own business. Or at least that's how it was before Hurricane Deborah made landfall. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs when the previous owners of her house practically fled the neighborhood, selling significantly under market value just to relocate quickly for a job opportunity. Now I understand they probably just wanted to escape before construction on Deborah's backyard infinity pool began. I first met Deborah when I brought over a welcome basket, just some local craft beer, artisan chocolates, and information about the neighborhood. I'm not naturally a social butterfly, but my mother raised me with old-fashioned Midwestern manners that die hard. How thoughtful, Deborah said with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes as she accepted my modest offering. She wore what I'd come to recognize as her standard uniform, designer yoga pants that had never seen an actual yoga studio, a cashmere sweater despite the warm weather, and enough jewelry to set off metal detectors at 50 paces. As she invited me in for a quick tour of her newly renovated home, I couldn't help but notice how she emphasized words like premium, exclusive, and top of the line when describing every fixture and appliance. The house had undergone a complete transformation from the modest 4-bedroom colonial it had been into what Deborah clearly considered a suburban palace. This kitchen island is imported Italian marble, she explained, running her manicured hand across the countertop that was bigger than my entire kitchen. We had to wait 6 months, but William, that's my husband, he said only the best for our forever home. He's a corporate attorney, you know, very successful. She managed to mention his job and success 3 more times during the 15-minute tour. Her expression changed slightly when she asked about my place, her eyes narrowing as though assessing a potential threat or, more likely, determining I wasn't worth much consideration. Oh, and you've been in your quaint little house for long? The way she said quaint made it sound like she was describing a gas station bathroom. When I mentioned I was an engineer, her interest visibly dimmed. Apparently, if you weren't a doctor, lawyer, or hedge fund manager, you barely registered on Deborah Harrington's social radar. That first interaction should have been my warning, a blaring red alert that I foolishly ignored. In the weeks that followed, Deborah launched what I can only describe as a calculated community takeover operation. She quickly ingratiated herself with the HOA board through a combination of flattery, intimidation, and strategic generosity. Her elaborate dinner parties became legendary, not for the conversation, but for the obscenely expensive wine she served and the not-so-subtle name-dropping that peppered her dinner table talk. Within 6 weeks of moving in, she had somehow managed to get herself elected as the HOA vice president, despite being a complete newcomer to the community. The previous vice president, a retired elementary school principal named Dorothy who had served faithfully for 7 years, suddenly stepped down, citing personal reasons. I later learned from Martha that those personal reasons included Deborah discovering and threatening to expose Dorothy's son's past DUI to the community. During this time, I kept to myself mostly, busy with work projects and occasional video game sessions with friends online. My job, designing power management systems for commercial buildings, kept me occupied during the day, and my modest social life filled the evenings. I noticed Debra's rapid ascent to neighborhood power, but frankly, HOA politics had always seemed like a special kind of hell I preferred to avoid. My philosophy was simple: pay my dues, follow the reasonable rules, and live my life. That is, until I received my electric bill 1 month after Deborah moved in. Opening that envelope was like getting punched in the gut. $450, nearly triple my usual $150. At first, I assumed it was a mistake and called the power company. The representative confirmed the reading was accurate and suggested I might have a faulty appliance or had significantly changed my usage patterns. I checked and double-checked my usage, wondering if I'd accidentally left something running, but everything seemed normal. I even went around the house with an electricity usage monitor, testing each major appliance, but found nothing that could explain the dramatic increase. The mystery deepened when my next-door neighbor on the other side, a retired couple named the Andersons, mentioned casually that their bill had remained consistent. Whatever was draining my power was specific to my property. It wasn't until a week later, when my home security camera sent a notification at 2 a.m, that I discovered what was happening. I groggily checked my phone and nearly fell out of bed when I saw Deborah Harrington, dressed in designer pajamas and a silk robe, sneaking across my backyard with a long extension cord. She plugged it into my outdoor outlet, the one I used for yard work, and ran the cord along our property line, cleverly concealed by the shrubs she had suggested the HOA plant for enhanced neighborhood aesthetics. The other end was connected to her Tesla, parked in her side driveway, positioned just right so the charging port faced our shared fence line. I watched in disbelief as she checked that everything was connected, glanced around furtively, and then scurried back into her house like some electricity-stealing gremlin. The next morning, I knocked on her door, phone in hand with the video queued up. When Deborah answered, wearing an expensive-looking tennis outfit and a bright smile, I cut straight to the point. "Deborah, we need to talk about you using my electricity to charge your Tesla." Her smile didn't waver for even a second. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Ethan," she said with a dismissive laugh. I showed her the video, and her expression hardened like quick-setting concrete. "That could be anyone," she said, despite the crystal-clear footage of her face. "And honestly, if your electrical system is so poorly designed that it's causing such high bills, perhaps you should consider upgrading. After all, maintaining property values is important to all of us in Pinewood." Before closing the door, she added with a honeyed voice that barely concealed her threat, "As HOA vice president, I'd be happy to discuss your landscaping violations sometime. Your hedges are 2 inches above regulation height." As I walked back to my house, I knew this was just the beginning. What I didn't know was that this was merely the opening act in a 6-month battle where I'd learned that not all Karens are created equal. Some are far more dangerous than what you see in viral videos. After discovering Deborah's midnight power theft, I took what I thought were reasonable precautions. I installed additional security cameras around my property and put a lockbox over my outdoor outlets. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Within 48 hours, I received an official HOA violation notice in my mailbox, claiming my unauthorized exterior modifications, the lockboxes, were against community guidelines and had to be removed immediately. The letter was signed by Gregory Palmer, the HOA inspector, but I recognized Deborah's handiwork. Gregory was a 58-year-old former middle manager who'd been laid off during corporate downsizing, and now wielded his clipboard and rulebook with the righteous fervor of a crusader. He showed up at my door the following day, chest puffed out importantly. "Mr. Bailey, I'm here to ensure compliance with the removal notice you received." I tried explaining about Deborah stealing electricity, even showing him the security footage. But his expression remained impassive. "That's a private dispute between neighbors," he said firmly. "The HOA doesn't get involved in such matters. However, these unapproved lockboxes are definitely within my jurisdiction." When I reluctantly removed the lockboxes under his watchful gaze, I caught a whiff of expensive cologne and noticed his new designer watch, Later, I learned from another neighbor that Deborah had been hosting appreciation happy hours for HOA board members, where the scotch flowed as freely as her complement. That weekend, I decided to attend the monthly HOA meeting for the first time since moving in. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, where about 30 homeowners gathered in uncomfortable folding chairs. When the floor opened for resident concerns, I raised my hand and began explaining the situation with documentation in hand. I'd like to address an issue regarding unauthorized use of private electricity. But before I could finish, Deborah interrupted smoothly. "Point of order," she called out. "Personal disputes aren't appropriate for the general meeting agenda. They should be submitted in writing to the board first." The HOA president, a balding man named Frank, who seemed perpetually confused, nodded in agreement. Yes, procedure must be followed. Please submit your concern in writing and we'll review it at the next board meeting." As I sat down, frustrated, Deborah gave me a smug smile from her seat at the board table. Then came the real bombshell of the evening. "Next agenda item," Frank announced, "approval for installation of community charging stations in common areas." My attention snapped back to the meeting as Deborah stood up with a glossy presentation folder. "As we all know, green energy is the future," she began with practiced enthusiasm. "I propose we install 4 Level 2 charging stations near the community center parking area. This improvement will increase property values and show Pinewood Estates is an environmentally conscious community." What she conveniently failed to mention was that one proposed station would be located just yards from her house, in the common area adjacent to my property. After the meeting, I lingered to review the proposal documents and discovered something that made my blood boil. The electricity costs for these charging stations would be billed to the HOA and distributed equally among all residents as part of our monthly dues. In other words, Deborah had found a way to make the entire neighborhood pay for charging her Tesla. When I looked at the installation plans for the new outlets, an uncomfortable reality hit me. This wasn't just between me and Deborah anymore. She had turned the entire neighborhood into a free energy source for her expensive car. And worse still, they didn't even know they were being scammed. I needed to understand what I was up against, so I spent the next few weeks researching HOA regulations, local laws, and electrical codes. If I was going to fight Deborah, I needed to know the rules better than she did. My military engineering background helped. I'd learned that in any battle, intelligence is as important as firepower. I discovered that while HOAs had considerable power over external property appearance, there were limits to their authority, especially when it came to utilities and safety measures. During my investigations, I met Martha Wilson, a 68-year-old widow who'd lived in Pinewood Estates since it was built. Martha had sharp eyes, a sharper tongue, and seemingly knew everything about everyone. "That Harrington woman," she said over coffee at her kitchen table, "she's got half the board eating out of her hand like trained poodles." Martha had been keeping meticulous notes on HOA activities for years and showed me how previous board members had been pressured to resign when they opposed certain measures. "Gregory isn't a bad man," she confided, "just weak and easily flattered. Been that way since his wife left him for her yoga instructor. And Frank, the president, he's just counting the days until his term ends so he can move to Florida." Through Martha, I also met Brian and Sarah Thompson, a couple in their 40s with 2 young kids. Brian worked as a high school teacher, and Sarah was a nurse at the local hospital. They were struggling with increasing HOA fees and were particularly concerned about the proposed charging stations. "We can barely keep up with the current dues," Sarah explained when I visited their home one evening. "Another increase would mean cutting back on Tommy's baseball league." Their son, an energetic 8-year-old, was currently showing my security camera footage to his younger sister, both giggling at the lady stealing electricity like a bad guy in a movie. With their help, I began building a case and gathering supporters. I discreetly installed a power monitoring device on my electrical panel to document exactly how much electricity Deborah was using, an average of 75 kilowatt hours each night, which at our local rates translated to substantial money over time. Brian and Sarah helped me collect signatures from other homeowners who were concerned about rising HOA costs, while Martha provided crucial information about HOA bylaws that could help our cause. By the time the next HOA meeting approached, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier: video evidence, power consumption data, cost calculations, and signatures from 23 households opposing the charging station proposal without proper individual metering. I felt prepared, confident even. The evening before the meeting, I was reviewing my presentation one last time when Martha called. "Ethan, the meeting's been postponed," she said, her voice tight with anger. "They're claiming technical issues with the clubhouse projector, but I just drove by and saw Deborah's car parked outside Frank's house. Something's happening." I stood there with a thick folder of evidence in my hands, watching as Deborah whispered to board members the following day in the community mailbox area. It was then I realized, sometimes you can't win playing by others' rules. Perhaps it was time to create a protection system, one that a former military engineer with expertise in electrical systems could design. The next morning, I decided to give Deborah one last chance to end this peacefully. I had always believed in direct communication before escalation, a principle that had served me well in the military and in life generally. I walked over to her house with my documentation in hand, videos, photographs, and calculations of electricity costs, all neatly organized in a professional-looking folder. Their home, which had already been impressive when they moved in, now featured new landscaping with imported Japanese maples and a completely redesigned front entrance with hand-carved double doors that must have cost more than my first car. William, her husband, opened the door this time. He was a tall, perpetually distracted-looking man in his mid-40s, with the kind of expensive haircut that tries desperately to hide early balding and the tan complexion of someone who plays golf, not for enjoyment, but for business connections. He was dressed in an expensive suit despite it being Saturday, the subtle pinstripes and monogrammed cuffs screaming, "I bill," at $500 an hour. I had only seen him a handful of times since they moved in. He seemed to leave early and return late most days, the quintessential absent corporate warrior. "Deborah's at her Pilates class," he said, checking his watch impatiently, a Rolex that caught the morning light. "Can this wait?" His tone suggested that whatever I had to say couldn't possibly be important enough to interrupt his schedule. I explained that it couldn't and showed him the evidence of his wife's activities. William reluctantly invited me into their marble-floored entryway, but no further, making it clear this wasn't a social call. He skimmed through the photos with barely concealed boredom, flipping through my meticulously prepared documentation as if it were a takeout menu from a restaurant he had no intention of ordering from. "Look," he finally said, handing back the folder without even looking at the cost calculations. "I'm sure there's some misunderstanding. It's just a few dollars of electricity, not worth getting worked up about." His dismissive tone made it clear that what was a significant sum to me was pocket change to him, the kind of person who wouldn't bend down to pick up a $20 bill because it wasn't worth his time. Before I could explain that it was much more than a few dollars and that the principle of stealing was the real issue, he glanced at his phone and frowned, using it as an obvious excuse to end our conversation. "I have a call with Tokyo in 5 minutes, he said, already backing toward his home office, visible down the hallway. "Why don't you two work this out like adults, and maybe don't make such a big deal over trivial neighborhood stuff?" He closed the door before I could respond, leaving me standing on his porch with my folder of evidence and a growing realization that both Harringtons shared the same fundamental character flaw, a complete inability to see beyond their own convenience and privilege. That afternoon, Deborah came stomping across our adjoining lawns, designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly highlighted hair. "How dare you go behind my back to William?" she hissed, careful to keep her voice down so other neighbors wouldn't hear. I remained calm, explaining again that she needed to stop using my electricity and that I would oppose her charging station scheme at the next HOA meeting. Her face flushed with anger. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "William is one of the top corporate attorneys in the state. One word from him, and your little remote job could disappear. One complaint about threatening behavior, and that military history of yours might not look so heroic." The threat was clear: back off, or she'd make my life difficult in ways I couldn't imagine. In the days that followed, I began noticing strange glances from neighbors who had previously been friendly. At the local grocery store, people who normally stopped to chat suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. The mystery was solved when Brian Thompson called to cancel our planned strategy meeting. "I'm sorry, man," he said awkwardly. "There's a rumor going around that you've been unstable since your military days. Something about you becoming obsessed with Deborah and stalking her property at night." I was stunned into silence. Deborah had flipped the script entirely, using my own security measures against me. "Sarah and I know it's not true," Brian hastily added, "but some people are keeping their distance. They're saying you installed those cameras to watch her, not to catch her stealing electricity." I organized a small meeting at my house with supporters, but only Martha and the Thompsons showed up. Others had sent apologetic texts, citing various commitments. As we discussed our dwindling options, Martha revealed more disturbing news. She's convinced the board to authorize enhanced landscaping services for the common area near your house, she explained grimly. The work will generate extra noise starting at 7 in the morning, every day, including weekends. The cost will be added to your monthly dues as a special assessment since it primarily benefits your property line. That night, after everyone left, I sat in my garage workshop and considered my options. As an electrical engineer with military experience in power systems, I knew there were ways to protect my property that wouldn't violate any laws or HOA regulations. I decided to install a smart power protection system, a perfectly legal device commonly used in industrial settings to protect against power theft and electrical anomalies. The system would detect unauthorized power usage during unusual hours and could automatically shut off if it detected excessive usage or irregular patterns. It would also deliver a small voltage fluctuation warning before complete shutdown, just enough to alert the user but not enough to cause any safety concerns under normal circumstances. I spent the next few days assembling the components and programming the system. My garage turned into a workshop as I meticulously tested each component. This wasn't just some jury-rigged contraption. I applied the same engineering standards I used in my professional work. The SPPS included multiple safety features: voltage monitoring, current detection, time of use restrictions, and most importantly, a 3-stage warning system that would activate well before any protective measures kicked in. I programmed the system to record all electrical activity and keep detailed logs of any unusual patterns, details that would prove critical later. The hardware itself was elegantly simple yet robust, industrial-grade components housed in a weatherproof enclosure that could withstand the Pacific Northwest's notorious rain. I even added battery backup so the system would remain operational during power outages. This wasn't excessive, it was professional. If I was going to protect my property, I'd do it right. After 3 days of development and testing, I installed this system at the back of my property, where I knew Deborah accessed her favorite outlets. I carefully mounted it according to all electrical code requirements and added a clear, professionally printed warning sign. Protected by SPPS, authorized use only. Unauthorized use may damage connected devices. The sign included standard electrical warning symbols and was illuminated by a small LED for nighttime visibility. But before my eyes, it could take on a different shape and color even on the designation. No one could claim they hadn't seen it. I even took date-stamped photographs of the installation to document everything was properly set up and clearly marked. I made absolutely certain the system was fully compliant with electrical codes and safety standards. The last thing I wanted was legal liability. I reviewed the National Electrical Code specifications twice and consulted with a buddy who worked as a city inspector to confirm everything was up to code. The system was designed not to harm people or property under normal use. It would only activate protective measures after multiple warnings were ignored, and even then, it would simply create a controlled fluctuation before safely disconnecting. Any damage would result only from someone deliberately overriding safety warnings. Essentially, they would have to work hard to harm their own equipment. As I tested the SPPS one final time on a cool Tuesday evening, watching the diagnostic LEDs blink in sequence confirming proper operation, I wondered if Deborah had ever learned the basic principle of physics that every engineering student knows by heart. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. In the military, we had another saying: play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Deborah was about to learn both lessons simultaneously. The morning after installing my SPPS, I watched through my kitchen window as Deborah noticed the new setup during her daily property inspection walk. She paused by the warning sign, squinting to read it, then rolled her eyes dramatically. That evening, I received another HOA violation notice, this time for unauthorized signage. But since the warning was a required safety notification for electrical systems under county regulations, I knew it couldn't be removed. I submitted the appropriate documentation citing the relevant codes, and, for once, Gregory couldn't argue with actual legal requirements. For the next few days, my security cameras showed Deborah eyeing the outlet but not using it. I wondered if the warning had actually worked, but Martha kept me updated on Deborah's movements around the neighborhood. "She's testing outlets near the clubhouse now," Martha reported after her evening walk. "But they're not powerful enough for fast charging, and she has to park too far from her house for comfort." I felt a small victory, until I received notification that the HOA board had approved emergency funding for upgraded electrical infrastructure in the common areas, bypassing the normal resident voting process by classifying it as an essential safety improvement. The following week, workmen installed new high-capacity outlets in the common area bordering my property and Deborah's, exactly as she had planned all along, but now expedited as an emergency measure. That night, my security system alerted me to movement, and I watched as Deborah smugly connected her Tesla to one of the new community outlets, giving a little satisfied wave toward my camera before strutting back to her house. The SPPS immediately began recording data on this new power usage pattern, confirming my suspicions. She was drawing enormous power during off-peak hours, and the cost would be distributed among all residents. It expanded the SPPS to monitor the new community outlets as well, not to control them, as they weren't on my property, but to gather data on usage patterns. The system revealed that Deborah was charging her car between 1 and 4 in the morning, every night, drawing maximum power for 3 straight hours. At current electricity rates, she was adding approximately $500 monthly to the combined HOA bill. Meanwhile, I continued receiving petty violation notices. My mailbox was half an inch too low, my garage door needed repainting despite being painted just last year, and my garbage cans were visible from the street for 15 minutes too long on collection day. I carefully complied with each minor violation while documenting everything and continuing to gather support among neighbors. The Thompsons had started showing my data to trusted friends, and slowly, a network of concerned homeowners was forming. Through Martha's connections, I learned that Deborah was planning something bigger, a proposal for an official Tesla supercharger station in the community center parking lot, with installation costs of $25,000, to be covered by a special assessment on all homeowners. The proposal would be introduced at the rescheduled HOA meeting in 2 weeks. One evening, as I was reviewing the SPPS data, I noticed something interesting. Whenever Deborah charged her Tesla, she would set it to draw maximum power immediately, bypassing the car's built-in gradual power ramp-up. This was unusual and potentially harmful to both the vehicle and the electrical system. The Tesla's battery management system was designed to handle standard charging patterns, not the aggressive power-grabbing Deborah seemed to prefer. My SPPS was programmed to identify abnormal usage patterns and respond with warning signals before implementing protective measures. Given Deborah's charging habits, the system would likely interpret her behavior as potentially damaging. I made no changes to the default safety protocols. They were standard industrial protections, but I ensured all warning systems were clearly visible and audible. The night before the rescheduled HOA meeting, my security camera alerted me to movement at 1 in the morning, Deborah's usual charging time. I watched as she approached her favorite community outlet with her Tesla gleaming under the moonlight. The ESPPS detected the connection and the immediate power surge as she set the car to maximum charge rate. Just as programmed, the system activated its warning protocol. A small yellow light began flashing on the outlet box, and a low beeping sound indicated abnormal power draw. Instead of reducing the charge rate or disconnecting, Deborah noticed the warning light, frowned, and then deliberately increased the charge rate further, as if challenging the system. I watched in disbelief as she smirked at what she clearly thought was my attempt to scare her off. The SPPS responded exactly as designed. After 3 warning cycles, it detected the dangerous power surge and enacted its protection protocol, creating a controlled voltage fluctuation before cutting power entirely. I checked the data display on my monitoring system. The SPPS had functioned correctly, had warned before taking protective action, but Deborah had not only ignored the warnings, but increased the risk by cranking up the power draw to dangerous levels. I received a notification from my security camera. Deborah was standing beside her Tesla, completely still, eyes wide, as she stared at the error message displayed on her car's screen. Now she understood. Property protection systems were not a bluff. The next morning, I was making coffee when furious pounding shook my front door. Through the peephole, I could see Deborah, still in her silk pajamas, her face contorted with rage. "Open this door right now, you vindictive little man!" she shouted, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. I calmly opened the door, coffee mug in hand. "Good morning, Deborah. Is everything okay?" Her eyes were wild as she jabbed a finger at my chest. "You know damn well everything is not okay. You destroyed my car. My Tesla is bricked, completely dead. And the diagnostic system says it's because of a power surge. You did this." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching the confrontation from their driveways. I maintained my composure, speaking clearly so the gathering audience could hear. I installed a standard smart power protection system to prevent unauthorized use of electricity, with clearly posted warnings about potential risks of misuse. Did something happen to your car while you were using community power at 1 a.m? Deborah's face flushed as she realized people were watching. "You deliberately sabotaged my car," she hissed more quietly. "It's going to cost $22,000 to replace the battery management system. William is calling our lawyer right now." "I'd be happy to explain the system to your lawyer," I replied, retrieving the documentation from my SPPS from just inside the door. "Here's the technical specifications, safety certifications, and warning notifications. The system is designed to protect against unauthorized usage and dangerous power conditions. Exactly what occurred when you ignored the warning lights and increased the power draw instead of disconnecting." I gestured toward my security camera. "I have footage of you ignoring the warning signals and deliberately increasing the charge rate, which triggered the safety protocol. The system functioned exactly as designed and certified." William arrived 20 minutes later in his Mercedes, phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call as he approached us, looking annoyed at the whole situation. "Ethan," he nodded curtly, "Deborah tells me you've damaged our Tesla with some homemade electrical trap." I handed him the technical documentation without comment. Unlike his wife, William actually read it, his frown deepening as he flipped through the pages. "This says the system has clear warning indicators that activate before any protective measures," he noted, looking at Deborah. "Did you see any warnings?" Deborah sputtered about irrelevant blinking lights as William continued scanning the documents. When I offered to show him the video of Deborah ignoring the warnings, he held up his hand. "That won't be necessary yet." I decided to lay all my cards on the table. "William, your wife has been stealing electricity from me personally and now from the community for months. I've documented everything, including how she manipulated the HOA to install charging outlets at community expense, primarily for her benefit. I have videos, power consumption data, and testimony from other residents. I attempted to resolve this directly with both of you multiple times. I watched as the lawyer and him calculated the situation. Additionally, I should mention that misuse of HOA funds for personal benefit could potentially be considered fraud, especially when someone in a leadership position directs community resources primarily for their own use." William's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "I see." He turned to Deborah, whose righteous anger had morphed into uncertainty. "We need to discuss this at home now." As they walked away, I heard him mutter, $22,000? Are you kidding me? And you've been doing what? With HOA funds? Later that afternoon, Deborah's precious Tesla was loaded onto a flatbed tow truck bound for the nearest service center. The preliminary diagnostic report confirmed significant damage to the battery management system, with repairs estimated at $22,000. Worse for Deborah, the damage wasn't covered under warranty because it was classified as resulting from improper charging practices and disregarding safety warnings. As the car was towed away, Deborah turned to me with hatred in her eyes. "You haven't won yet, Ethan. The HOA will back me on this." I smiled. "Actually, I think we need to meet at the special HOA meeting I've just requested. I believe everyone would be very interested in seeing these videos and learning who they've been paying electricity for all these months." The special HOA meeting was held the following week in the community clubhouse with record attendance. The tension in the air was palpable, as neighbors who normally only exchanged casual waves at the mailbox now sat shoulder to shoulder, whispering in small groups. Nearly every household was represented, with people standing along the walls after all the chairs were filled. I arrived 15 minutes early to set up my presentation and was surprised to find Martha already there, organizing a stack of documents with military precision. "Just some light reading material," she winked, sliding a copy my way. It was a complete record of every HOA financial decision for the past 6 months, annotated with relevant bylaw sections that had been violated. Martha had been preparing for this showdown longer than I realized. Frank, the HOA president, a balding man with perpetually sweaty palms who'd been looking forward to retirement in Florida before getting entangled in Deborah's schemes, looked nervous as he called the meeting to order. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his reading glasses. especially when he noticed Martha distributing her printouts to attendees. Deborah sat in the front row, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment, her arms crossed and expression stormy. William was conspicuously absent. Apparently, Tokyo needed him again. "We have a special presentation tonight," Frank stammered, his voice cracking slightly as he avoided Deborah's laser-like glare from the front row. "Ethan Bailey has requested time to address a community concern." The room fell silent as I walked to the front, laptop in hand. I felt calm, prepared. This wasn't so different from military briefings I'd given, except the stakes were personal. As I connected my computer to the projector, I noticed Brian and Sarah Thompson giving me encouraging thumbs up from their seats, their children beside them with coloring books to keep them occupied, during what promised to be a lengthy adult discussion. I had asked Brian earlier if the meeting was appropriate for kids, and he'd responded, "They should see that standing up to bullies works," which pretty much summed up why I liked the Thompsons. I connected my laptop to the projector and began methodically presenting my evidence: security videos of Deborah's stealing electricity, power consumption data, and detailed calculations of costs. For the past 6 months, I explained, the Harrington household has been using approximately 75 kilowatt-hours of electricity nightly from community sources. At current rates, that's roughly $500 monthly added to our collective HOA bills. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as I displayed a graph showing HOA fee increases coinciding perfectly with Deborah's charging habits. Furthermore, I continued, the recent emergency electrical upgrades were pushed through without proper voting, specifically to facilitate this ongoing abuse of community resources. I also explained the SPPS I had installed, demonstrating that it was a standard industrial protection system with proper certifications and warning mechanisms. When unauthorized usage is detected, the system provides clear visual and audible warnings before initiating any protective measures. Unfortunately, these warnings were deliberately ignored, resulting in damage to the connected device. I played the video, showing Deborah not only ignoring the warning lights, but actually increasing the power draw in apparent defiance. Deborah jumped to her feet, face flushed. "This is character assassination. He's been harassing me for months with his cameras and now this ridiculous presentation. The board should remind everyone that unauthorized recordings of board members is against HOA policy." But her usual air of authority had evaporated. From the back of the room, Brian Thompson stood up. "My family has been struggling to pay the increased HOA fees," he said quietly. "We had to pull our son from baseball because we couldn't afford the equipment and fees on top of these charges. Are you saying we've been paying to charge your Tesla all this time?" Other residents began speaking up. Elderly residents on fixed incomes, young families stretching their budgets, all affected by the increased costs. Gregory Palmer, the HOA inspector who had been so quick to cite me for violations, was conspicuously silent, staring at his clipboard as though it might shield him from the community's growing anger. William Harrington wasn't present, having suddenly discovered an important business trip that couldn't be postponed. Frank attempted to regain control of the meeting. "Perhaps we should form a committee to investigate these allegations," but was interrupted by Martha Wilson's commanding voice. "I move for an immediate vote to require full restitution of all misappropriated funds, removal of Deborah Harrington from the HOA board, and a new election for all board positions." The motion was seconded by at least a dozen voices at once. The vote wasn't even close. The community overwhelmingly supported all 3 measures, with only Deborah and 2 loyal friends opposing. The final tally: Deborah would repay approximately $7,000 in electricity costs, she was removed from the board effective immediately, and a special election would be held the following month. Brian Thompson was nominated as a candidate for the new board president on a platform of transparency and fairness. In the aftermath, changes came swiftly to Pinewood Estates. The community seemed to collectively exhale, as if freed from a spell. Deborah and William put their house on the market within 2 weeks, listing it well below market value for a quick sale. The rumor mill, primarily powered by Martha's extensive network, reported they were relocating to another state where a cousin of William's had connections to an exclusive gated community, presumably one with better electricity security measures. Their moving day was notably quiet, with no neighbors offering to help or bringing customary farewell gifts. The only person who showed up was Martha, who sat in a lawn chair across the street knitting and occasionally raising her teacup in a mock toast whenever Deborah looked her way. Gregory resigned as HOA inspector, citing health concerns, though everyone knew his real condition was acute embarrassment. He eventually apologized to several homeowners he had unfairly cited and now keeps such a low profile that some new residents don't even know who he is. Frank accelerated his retirement plans and moved to Florida 3 months ahead of schedule, seemingly relieved to escape the neighborhood drama. The new board, led by Brian, implemented sweeping changes focused on transparency and fairness. They revised regulations for community utilities, including a completely new accounting system that itemized exactly where every dollar of HOA fees went. The board installed official electric vehicle charging stations with individual metering, so users paid for their own electricity, a project I helped design as my contribution to the community. The stations were modern, efficient, and most importantly, fair. Within 6 months, 3 other residents purchased electric vehicles, knowing they could now charge them ethically and conveniently. I declined an offer to join the new HOA board, despite numerous neighbors encouraging me to run. Committee meetings and parliamentary procedure weren't really my style, but I agreed to serve as a technical advisor for the community's security and energy systems. This arrangement suited me perfectly. I could contribute my expertise without sitting through hours of discussions about appropriate mailbox decorations or the authorized shade of beige for exterior paint. The Thompsons' son rejoined his baseball league, with the team going on to win the regional championship that summer. Sarah organized a community watch program that actually focused on genuine security issues rather than policing minor rule infractions. Martha started a community garden in the common area where residents could grow vegetables and flowers, transforming a previously unused space into something that brought people together. The house next door eventually sold to a young doctor and her programmer husband, who turned out to be ideal neighbors. Friendly but respectful of privacy, quiet but sociable at community events. They drive a modest hybrid and actually ask permission before installing a small fountain that technically exceeded the water feature size regulations, which the new board promptly approved. Every time I drive past the spot where Deborah used to park her Tesla, I can't help but smile. Today, there's an official charging station there, with a dedicated meter and transparent payment system. The irony isn't lost on me. Deborah could have had exactly what she wanted if she'd just gone about it honestly and fairly. Instead, her entitlement cost her $22,000 in repairs, $7,000 in restitution, and whatever they lost in the rushed home sale. Sometimes, people who rely on power and privilege forget an important lesson. Not all victims are helpless. An electrical engineer with knowledge of protection systems can be the most expensive lesson a Karen who thinks he can take whatever she wants without consequences will ever learn. There's a certain poetry to it. Deborah came into our community like a storm, disrupting lives and bending rules to her will, only to be undone by the very electricity she tried to steal. As Martha told me over coffee recently, her wise eyes twinkling over her reading glasses, you know what they say, karma doesn't need Wi-Fi to connect to people who deserve it. I couldn't agree more. Sometimes justice comes through official channels, and sometimes it arrives in a carefully engineered package with warning lights that entitled people really should pay attention to. The best part? The community is stronger now. People talk to each other more, look out for one another, and the transparency of the new board has restored trust that the previous leadership had eroded. We're not perfect, no neighborhood is, but we've learned that standing together against bullies works at any age. And if there's one thing I've learned from this whole experience, it's that electrical engineering skills might not make you the life of the party, but they sure come in handy when you need to teach someone about the true cost of power.
Thanks for watching QA Stories. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more wild tales coming your way.